All right, we're going to talk today about corn nematodes. I just threw up here on my header slide that they're silent thieves. I think they're a problem that corn growers are not particularly aware of. They feed on the roots, the ones that are an issue here in Alabama on corn, and the symptoms are often identical to those of a fertility disorder, maybe low soil pH, a hard pan, flooded soils, but some sort of condition where you have slowed growth of the corn as well as discoloration of the foliage. So, for all intents and purposes, if you go out there and look at it, you think you're looking at a fertility issue more often than not, but that's not what it is. We have problems with nematodes in corn every year. They were a particular problem in 2016 in the spring. I think we had some cooler weather in April, which slowed the corn down in and of itself. But then when you added the nematode feeding on the roots under conditions that were not ideal for plant growth, you got symptoms similar to those that are shown on this particular image, which is some slow growing seedlings. Oh, it's this one. What did I do?
Hit.
There we go.
Perfect.
All right. In the upper left-hand corner, it's just another image of the same field showing the reduced seedling growth, which is typically what you would associate with, in this case, it's stubby root nematode. Below that is a shot of a field with root knot nematode in it. This is corn down in Brewton. And then we've had, again, another shot of some older corn with stubby root in it with the stunted plants in the foreground. Most of the stand in this particular planting looked good, but there were little hot spots out there where the plants were severely stunted, and that's not uncommon with stubby root nematode. And then in the upper right-hand corner is the root injury that we associated with stubby root nematode on corn. You got the knobby ends of the roots. You have very few feeder roots. With root knot, you might see some galling, but the galls are not anywhere near as large as those that you might see on something like tomato or even peanut. So at least at this point in time, the two nematodes that we've had the most issues with have been cotton root knot and stubby root nematode, but there are some other nematodes, lesion, sting, and there may be a few more that are capable of damaging corn, and we do have the soils in this state to support those nematodes. I've already mentioned that root knot is probably the most common nematode pest that we have in corn. It turns out that the particular race that goes to cotton also goes to corn, so that anywhere in the state where we have had cotton production or root, particularly root knot in cotton in the past, is going to be a field where a grower may see sizable yield losses to cotton root knot in corn. Like most nematodes, they prefer sandy or sandy loam soils, but even in North Alabama, where we're getting into continuous corn production, we're starting to see them pop up in clay-type soils. From work we've done in the past, the rate of reproduction is just as good on corn as it is on cotton, which is so indicates that both of them are equally good hosts. The yield losses that we've seen in some rotation studies suggest that in a continuous corn situation or in corn behind cotton, you could see a yield loss of up to 30%, but that's probably an extreme situation. But also indicated was that for every 100 juveniles in a fall soil sample, we may lose 4 to 11% of our yield. And I think based on what we've seen in some of the more recent trials, it probably is about 4 to 5% yield loss for every 100 juveniles in that fall sample. And from what we've seen so far in the few studies that we have run, is that there is no resistance in corn to the cotton root knot nematode. So, maybe if you go into some of the old literature, they'll mention that you can rotate cotton with corn to knock down this nematode, but that is not the case. Stubby root nematode has popped up a good bit in the last couple of years. You saw in those earlier images that you get patchy areas of stunted plants. They look like they've been a fertility issue or maybe low soil pH. The problem with this nematode is it has a host range that covers a lot of our field crops, but it looks like that the highest rate of reproduction is going to be on corn. It is a sandy soil pest. Unlike cotton root knot, we haven't done any studies specifically to look at the impact of stubby root nematode on corn yields, but anytime you have a sharp slowing of growth and what appears to be a fertility issue, there's no doubt that this nematode is capable of greatly reducing yields, certainly on the level that cotton root knot can do it. And the threshold for treatment is fairly low. It may be as low as 10, and the absolute threshold for treatment is 40 nematodes per 100 cc's. From the work that was done last year, it looks like the numbers are high in the spring, and they really don't increase during the summer like the cotton root knot does. So you tend to have a fairly level population or a declining population over the course of the summer. So probably the best time, well, they're probably on some of the weeds out there, and fall would probably still be a good time to sample, but we need to do some more sampling to establish when to really be able to identify when this nematode population peaks. And we did have some lesions show up last year. It was in a field where we had stubby root and root knot, so it was hard to determine what it was doing by itself, but it's like the others. It likes a sandy soil. It has a broad host range. It particularly will go to peanuts and cause damage to the pods, so that's something to keep an eye on in peanuts, is the damage to the pods. And the threshold for treatment is 200 nematodes per 100 cc's of soil. And last year we picked up some populations in that range. We don't have a lot of control options for nematodes in corn. As I said, we don't have any resistance to depend on, and that's usually our first line of defense in these situations. So the most effective means is to manage these nematodes with rotation. Particularly root knot is easily managed with rotation. And then the second is to use a nematicide. At least with root knot, we have a better idea of what the hosts are and what the non-hosts are and how to rotate away from this nematode. And by far the best crop to manage cotton root knot in either cotton or corn is going to be peanuts. It is a non-host. They won't reproduce on it. And even 1 year of peanuts will knock the populations back to the point where we may not need a nematicide. I've also seen listed grain sorghum, but I've not really done any sampling in grain sorghum to confirm that this nematode does not reproduce on it. There are also root knot resistant soybean varieties, which would be a reasonable option. Sesame would be, and so would sun hemp if you're looking for a summer cover crop. But on the other two nematodes, we have more issues in trying to manage them with rotation, and we've not looked at that. When you get into nematicides, for most of our growers, we have two nematicide seed treatments, Avicta Duo and Poncho Votivo. The granular options are either Counter 20G or Mocap 15G. These are old, either carbamate or maybe organophosphate insecticides. They've been around for 40 or 50 years. They also have some nematicidal activity, and almost all my experience has been with Counter. Growers also have the option of using Telone 2, but it is a much more expensive treatment, and we have not evaluated the efficacy of Telone 2 for managing root knot in corn or any other nematodes. There is an issue with Counter and Mocap. I think even though they work, their registrations are under review by EPA. They're interested in getting rid of these older insecticides, and so at some point in time they're likely to be canceled. I'll talk a little more about efficacy, but the seed treatments don't work very well. So right at this moment, if EPA canceled Counter and MoCap, we would not have any products available for nematode management in corn. These slides just illustrate the symptoms that we see and the response that we get to nematicide inputs. At the top are some Evicta Duo corn plus Counter and a Poncho plus Counter treatment, compared with, in the lower images, the same seed treatments without the Counter nematicide, and the non-Counter treated corn is much smaller and lighter in color than the Counter treated corn. It's literally, the seedlings will be twice as large for the Counter treated than the non-treated corn. And this slide just illustrates that point. It also addresses root knot reproduction. None of the seed treatments and the nematicides are in darker green had any effect on root knot reproduction, but the Counter did reduce juvenile counts on corn. And if you look at dry seedling weights, there's no difference between the insecticide seed treatments and the nematicide treatments, but seed treatments, when you go down and look at Counter versus a non-treated, the plants have double the weight. So they really do make a difference on young corn as far as growth is concerned. And this is just some data from 2016 illustrating the same point. The treatments are different. We've got vellum total at 14 and 18 fluid ounces. Vellum is not registered for use in corn. It was put in here just for experimental purposes to see what type of response we might get with it when it's applied in furrow. It worked as well as Counter in improving plant growth. So the plants are much larger when treated with all three of these treatments as compared with the control. If you look at nematode control with these products, the vellum reduced root knot populations. The Counter was numerically but not statistically lower. The Counter helped control stubby root, though, as I said, the populations are low. And all three of them reduced lesion nematode populations on corn. So they work fairly well. And I've already talked about yield loss due to root knot in corn. We'll just go on by that. This is just some yield data from a couple of years ago, illustrating the yield response with Counter on Poncho Votivo and Poncho treated corn. We did not get a response with some of the other treatments. We see some situations like this in some of our field trials. And then this is the trial that was run particularly on the right-hand side. Counter increased yield about 30 bushels per acre. The vellum was somewhere in the 25 bushel yield gain in comparison with the control. And one of the things that has shown up as we're pushing our corn yields up, the size of the yield bump that we're getting out of the Counter continues to increase. So when we're in the 120 to 30 bushel range yield potential, we were at maybe 10 to 15 bushels, then it's 160 bushel yields. We went to 20, 25, and now with 190 bushel corn, we're at 30 bushels per acre. So the treatments more than pay for themselves. One other trial that we ran last year in response to some of the issues that the growers are running into was a post-plant treatment of Counter on corn to see if we could bring the corn out of nematode damage. We had stubby root out in this particular trial. And in the end, on the right-hand side, an application of Counter 20 days after planting did bring yields up. But right now, the post-plant application of Counter there is not a label for a post-plant application of Counter in corn. There is a post-plant label for insect control. So it does have a post-plant label. AMVAC is going to apply for a 2EE to get a label for a post-plant treatment in corn for nematode control sometime in the near future. So that label will be added. All in all, we'll just review some of the points on nematode control in corn. It's important to do a fall nematode soil assay to identify any potential yield or any potential nematode problems. and identify those situations where we may see a yield loss. There's really no way to guess on this. One thing that does occur if the field does have a damaging population, the nematode's always going to be there, but it may be managed through rotation. You do have, if there is sizable numbers or populations there, you may want to change from growing corn to growing a non-host crop to try and knock those populations back without using any chemical treatments. But you do have the option of putting out counter in furrow at planting time. And as I said, where we have nematodes, you see a nice yield gain. Where we don't have any of the nematodes that I mentioned, we're not seeing a yield response. So they really are specific response to the presence of those nematodes. And as I mentioned before, the nematicide seed treatments just do not work. And at this point in time, I don't really see any point in purchasing seed with those materials on there. So, this is just something, a work in progress. We'll have more trials out there in 2017, and we're going to look at a lot of the issues that we looked at this year, some alternative treatments. We've got a new product that we're going to screen, and we're going to look at post-plant applications of nematicides. Thank you.
Okay, Austin, I've got some questions for you. When you're sampling for nematodes, how many samples should you take? I mean, do you have a feel for that? Do you just look if you've got some suspects, some bad spots? Do you take extra samples? I mean, can you do some sort of precision ag thing going on here and treat just part of the field? That's a lot of questions all wrapped up in one, but basically it all comes down to samples.
Well, if you go out, if you see a problem in the late spring, early summer, I would certainly specifically sample the areas that have a problem and pull samples from those areas, and then maybe some others where the corn is doing well. Now, that's a diagnostic situation. If it so happens, excuse me, that you put a drone up and you can map the field and see some of the areas, the other option would be to sample areas that you think had poor growth and compare them with areas that had good growth, and have those run in the fall. The other is to sample according to soil type, because usually, and there is some association with increasing populations as the sand content of the soil goes up. So your stiffer soils, you may just sample a little bit there and concentrate your sampling on the lighter soil types. There has been work in the past using soil conductivity as a means to apply telone 2 and vary the rates as you go across different soil types. That's been done in peanuts. It would probably work in corn. We've not done that with counter insecticide. So that's something that we haven't looked at. But I would guess that if you actually did the studies, it would confirm that you could do it, and that would be fine. But and I don't think it's really that difficult to come up with a conductivity map.
Right, and that's just sort of an indirect measure of soil texture.
Yes, and and as I said, usually your nematodes are going to be on the less conductive, lighter soil types. And that's where you would probably put a full rate out, and you would probably then could move into a lower rate when you moved into the stiffer soils. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Austin.
Good.